Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Today we're taking a truly deep plunge into a story that really gripped the world of Formula One. It reveals fascinating layers of power dynamics, corporate governance, and, well, some pretty high-stakes maneuvering that go way beyond the racetrack. This isn't just about racing. It's an AI insights deep dive into a remarkable case study. Leadership under intense pressure. We've compiled a formidable stack of sources, including a really insightful F1 AI insights analysis titled The Demise of Christian Horner at Red Bull, just to sort of extract the most important nuggets of knowledge and maybe some surprising facts for you. Our mission today, essentially, is to understand the complex sequence of events that ultimately led to this major leadership change. Right at the pinnacle of one of F1's most dominant teams, we'll be meticulously tracing the timeline, dissecting the true pressures at play, and exploring a truly crucial question. Why did this dramatic dismissal happen when it did? Not, at the end of the season like you might expect. Okay, let's unpack this. We're talking about Christian Horner.
Team principal who, over nearly 2 decades, led Red Bull Racing to incredible, almost dynastic success. Yet, despite that glittering track record, he was ultimately removed. It's a classic, albeit pretty brutal, example of how even supreme performance on track doesn't always insulate you from pressures off track, especially when, brand integrity and internal politics start to collide.
Indeed. And what's truly fascinating here, I think, is how the narrative around Horner's situation evolved so rapidly. It shifted from what looked like an internal complaint, maybe even a minor issue, into this full-blown corporate crisis that threatened the very fabric of Red Bull racing. This deep dive will meticulously illustrate how multiple, seemingly disparate factors just converged, almost with explosive force. And ultimately, that compelled the Red Bull board to make a strategic decision that has fundamentally redefined the immediate future of one of Formula One's most powerful, most successful entities. We'll be looking far beyond the headlines, trying to uncover the intricate strategic calculations and the immense pressures that truly shaped this outcome.
So to really understand the why behind Christian Horner's departure, we absolutely need to start with the when. That seems key. Because this isn't a story that began with a decline in performance, which is what makes the timing of these events so perplexing, right? At first glance, if Red Bull was still winning, why the sudden change?
Precisely. And that's the core paradox, isn't it? The one we need to unravel.
Mm-hmm.
If we connect this to the broader picture, leadership changes in high-performance organizations, it immediately underscores that the reasons for his departure were far from conventional. This wasn't your standard underperforming executive scenario, not at all.
Okay, let's set the scene then. The 2023 Formula One season.
Mm-hmm.
Red Bull Racing was, they were on an absolute tear, experiencing a level of dominance that was just astonishing. We're talking about a season where they won an unprecedented 21 out of 22 races. Just think about that. Their undisputed star driver, Max Verstappen, secured his 3rd consecutive world title with what seemed like almost effortless ease. It was a level of control, of superiority, that you rarely, if ever, see in a competitive sport like F1, where the margins are usually so tight.
You're absolutely right. It wasn't merely a good season.
Mm-hmm.
The RB19 car, that machine beneath Max Verstappen, has already gone down in history. One of the most dominant cars in F1's entire existence. In this period, it unequivocally solidified Christian Horner's legacy. Hugely successful, seemingly indispensable team principal, the architect of this modern F1 dynasty. There was zero performance crisis whatsoever. None. In fact, if you looked at any metric of on-track success, his stature within the sport and crucially within the wider Red Bull organization, was arguably at its absolute peak. This context is absolutely crucial because it immediately challenges any superficial idea that his eventual departure was performance-related. It just doesn't add up. Instead, it powerfully suggests that a deeper, more systemic, and profoundly internal issue was at play. And what's often overlooked, perhaps, is how such overwhelming success, paradoxically, it might have actually masked underlying vulnerabilities, or maybe escalating power struggles within the organization. It's a phenomenon you see sometimes in these high-performing teams, right? The sheer momentum of victory can create a blind spot. When you're winning 21 out of 22 races, maybe minor internal frictions, a loss of trust here, a disagreement over strategy there, they often get dismissed. Growing pains are just ignored because the results are so good. That perceived invincibility that comes with dominance can, unfortunately, breed a reluctance to really critically examine the foundations, which makes the organization even more susceptible when an external shock like a public scandal finally hits. And the sheer scale of that 2023 dominance, 21 wins out of 22, it's almost unheard of in a sport known for its intense, cutthroat competition. That just made the subsequent eruption of controversy all the more shocking, all the more impactful.
So Red Bull's basking in this unprecedented glory, and then just as the 2024 season was kicking off, things took a remarkably sharp, completely unexpected turn. This is where the controversy really erupts, suddenly pulling Christian Horner into a very different kind of spotlight, one far removed from the celebratory glow of the racetrack.
Which begs the question, doesn't it? What was the specific catalyst? What ignited this dramatic shift? Well, it all began apparently with a female Red Bull employee filing a complaint against Horner. This triggered an internal investigation, which, is a mandatory step for a global corporation like Red Bull. Initially, after this internal probe, Horner was cleared. No wrongdoing found officially. However, the immediate perception, certainly in the paddock and the media surrounding this outcome, was that it felt far more political than genuinely conclusive. This wasn't just whispers. It widely suggested a significant lack of transparency, maybe even a perceived bias in the process itself. And as you can imagine, that naturally fueled further questions and deep distrust, both inside the team and outside. A rapid clearing without detailed public justification often raises more eyebrows than it settles, especially when the underlying facts remain shrouded in secrecy.
And then, just days later, boom, the real curveball hit the entire F1 world. WhatsApp messages, allegedly from Horner, were anonymously leaked, sent to a huge network of journalists, key F1 figures, team principals, everyone. This immediately raised serious questions about the ethics, the transparency of how Red Bull had handled the situation internally. And these weren't just, embarrassing messages in a general sense. Our sources indicate explicit content, phrases like, miss your laugh in your ass, which immediately underscore the inappropriate and potentially explicit nature of the communication. It shocked people. It galvanized public opinion and corporate reaction on a scale F1 maybe hadn't seen before.
That leak was the match that lit the fuse, absolutely. It completely transformed what had been a contained, albeit maybe poorly handled, internal issue into this massive public spectacle, forced the whole affair into the global spotlight. And this explosive revelation was quickly followed by Jos Verstappen, Max's incredibly influential father, going public with a stark, unequivocal warning. He stated clearly, publicly, that Red Bull will explode if Christian Horner remained in his position. Now, this wasn't a subtle hint. This is a public declaration of war, almost. It immediately signaled an internal Cold War, a direct confrontation, essentially, between Christian Horner and the immensely powerful Verstappen camp, Max and Jos. And the significance of Jos Verstappen's public statement, you really can't overstate it. He's not just a parent. He's a highly influential figure in Max's career, holds significant sway in the paddock because of his son's talent and leverage. When he spoke out so forcefully, it instantly turned this into a high-stakes battle for control, for allegiance within the Red Bull family. It put immense, immediate pressure on the board to choose sides, effectively signaling that the status quo, with Horner still at the helm, just wasn't viable anymore.
Right. So as the drama intensified, spiraled outward, Red Bull entered this phase of intense, almost desperate crisis management. And what was particularly telling was Max Verstappen's public posture. Surprisingly quiet, really. He didn't offer a vocal defense of his team principal. But his silence was incredibly loud, wasn't it? He was clearly in an unassailable position of power, and his lack of public support for Horner was a significant, unmistakable indicator for where the team's most valuable asset truly stood.
You're absolutely right. His silence spoke volumes. Deafening, almost. And what's fascinating here are the subtle but profoundly significant shifts behind the scenes that started unfolding after this controversy blew up. We saw Helmut Marko's influence, a longtime, hugely powerful figure in the Red Bull motorsport program, begin to visibly wane. People started questioning his future. And then, perhaps most tellingly, Adrian Newey, Red Bull's legendary technical visionary. The man often called the engineering maestro, the genius behind their title-winning cars. He announced his departure. Now, this was far more than just losing an employee. This was losing a cornerstone of their entire technical prowess. The individual largely credited with designing those dominant cars, including the record-breaking RB19. Newey wasn't just a designer. He kind of embodied Red Bull's entire design philosophy, didn't he? His unique ability to blend raw speed with elegant simplicity, often pushing the limits of the rules. That's what made the RB19 and its predecessor so special. His departure wasn't just a loss of talent. It was a potential fundamental shift in the team's technical DNA, a massive psychological blow. It inevitably affects confidence in future car development. When key figures like Newey leave amidst controversy, it signals something deeper is wrong, doesn't it? More than just a single scandal.
Yeah, absolutely. A huge blow. And as if that wasn't enough pressure, by June, stories began circulating about a very specific, very impactful clause in Max Verstappen's contract. Allegedly, it allowed him to exit Red Bull if Helmut Marko was removed from his position. Now, that puts immense, almost existential pressure on Red Bull, threatening their grip on their biggest asset, They're golden goose. It's an extraordinary level of leverage for a driver to have, tying his future not just to the team, but directly to specific key people within it.
It really highlights the incredible, almost unparalleled leverage a star driver can wield in modern Formula One, a sport increasingly defined by individual talent. It shows how a team becomes strategically vulnerable if their top talent feels their future is linked to specific individuals, or if those individuals are removed. The implications of a clause like that are huge, even beyond the immediate season. Losing a driver of Max's caliber, the ripple effect on team morale, investor confidence, the long-term stability of the whole Red Bull racing operation. It would be profound. It's not just about losing points on track, it's about losing the very identity of the team's current success, which is so deeply tied to Max. That clause effectively turned Marco into a kind of human shield, didn't it? Making any move against him a direct threat to Max staying with the team, and therefore a threat to their entire winning strategy.
So we fast forward mid-2025. And the team's performance takes a slight noticeable dip. They slip to fourth in the constructor standings. Now, as you said, not catastrophic by any means, especially compared to 2023's dominance. But it is a noticeable drop from their recent stratospheric standards.
And this raises that really important question again. Was this performance dip the actual underlying reason for the firing? Our source clearly indicates this dip was symptomatic, not causal. And for good reason, really. Red Bull has a history of weathering far worse performance issues without resorting to such drastic leadership changes. Think back to the turbulent 2014-2018 period. Red Bull struggled massively with engine partners then, often fighting just to get on the podium, yet Christian Horner remained firmly at the helm through all that. So this historical resilience to performance dips makes our source's point really critical. It powerfully reinforces the idea that the underlying issues here were fundamentally different, far more complex, certainly more pressing than typical on-track performance woes. That phrase, firing Horner because of performance, is a smokescreen, straight from our source. It means the dip merely provided a convenient narrative cover, a plausible, outwardly acceptable reason for a decision that was, in reality, driven by far deeper, more critical strategic factors, not the actual driving force itself.
Okay, so if it wasn't about the lap times, if it wasn't really about the constructors' standings slipping a bit, what were the true forces at play? What pressured Red Bull's board into this monumental decision? Here's where it gets really interesting, I think, as we peel back the layers. Reveal the complex, interconnected factors that truly weighed on them.
Exactly. This wasn't about shaving off a tenth of a second in qualifying. It was about safeguarding the very brand integrity of Red Bull, navigating these incredibly intricate power dynamics within the organization, and securing the long-term foundation of the team's future. It was a multifaceted crisis that demanded a strategic response far more profound, far more far-reaching than you'd expect from just a simple managerial change.
Right. And our sources really highlight the undeniably explicit nature of those leaked WhatsApp messages, saying they weren't just personally embarrassing for Horner, but they exposed Red Bull corporate governance, which means they weren't just a private issue. They became a very public indictment of how the company handles things internally. Ethical standards, duty of care to employees, all that.
This point is absolutely critical. Major media outlets, like Fox, framed the entire incident as emblematic of F1's failure to protect women, particularly within what are still, let's face it, largely male-dominated leadership structures across the sport. In an era where Formula One is actively, aggressively pushing for greater diversity, broader inclusion, fundamental ethical reforms, Red Bull found itself at a stark, unavoidable crossroads. Inaction or any perception of a cover-up would have inevitably led to severe, sustained pressure from their major global sponsors. Companies like Oracle and Ford. Sponsors today, especially these global giants, are incredibly sensitive to brand reputation and ethical alignment. They invest not just in winning, but in projecting a certain image. And as our source bluntly puts it, they don't want to be linked to sex scandal cover-ups. Simple as that. The longer Christian Horner remained in his position amidst these highly publicized allegations and leaks, the greater the reputational risk grew, exponentially. Not just for Red Bull Racing, but for the entire Red Bull brand and its crucial corporate partners. And consider the broader implications for F1 as a whole, right? The sport is actively trying to broaden its global appeal, shed older, less inclusive images. A scandal involving such a high-profile team principal affects the sport's overall brand image, its ability to attract new audiences, particularly women, new talent into the sport. The potential financial impact, the catastrophic reputational damage if Oracle or Ford, both massive long-term partners, had publicly distanced themselves or even pulled their multi-million-dollar sponsorships, it would have been immense. Unthinkable, really. It's a clear, undeniable signal that corporate values, public perception, ethical considerations. They now hold as much, if not more, weight than pure on-track performance in securing the partnerships that drive modern Formula One.